Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a really significant book, The Buddha's Ancient Path by Piyadassi Thera. This source is grounded right in the Pali Canon, which many see as the oldest record we have of what the Buddha actually taught. Our goal here is simple. Pull out the essential insights, give you a clear understanding, maybe even a shortcut to the core of Buddhism and its practical path to peace.
Exactly, and the source itself calls this the ancient path, the Puramaga. That's the Buddhist term. So we'll walk through the material, pull out the key points, and hopefully help you see what's so powerful about these teachings, sticking just to what this source tells us.
Okay, let's start with the man himself, Siddhartha Gautama. The source paints this picture of a prince, with everything, who at 29 makes this huge move, the Great Renunciation. Where he leaves his wife, his child, the whole kingdom behind, not out of carelessness, but to find a supreme security from bondage nibbana. That's the goal.
All right, and it wasn't easy. The source mentions 6 years of really intense ascetic practices, pushing himself almost to the point of death. But then he had this realization that this extreme self-punishment was, well, utterly futile. He remembered meditating peacefully as a child, and that shifted his approach back towards moderation.
And that path led him to the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. The source says he sat down with this inflexible resolution. Basically, I'm not getting up until I figure this out, until he reached full enlightenment, Sammasambodhi.
And under that tree, he did. He attained full enlightenment. He understood the eternal verities of life, as the source puts it, and, crucially, freed his mind from the taint ends pleasures, the drive for becoming, ignorance, all of it.
What really jumped out at me from the source is how much it stresses that the Buddha was human. An extraordinary man, yes, a unique being, man par excellence, but explicitly no connection whatsoever with a god or any other supernatural being. He wasn't divine, not an incarnation.
That's such a critical point in this source. So if he's not a god, what's the deal? What's he offering? The book is really clear. He taught that deliverance, freedom, it could be attained independently of an external agency. It's not about praying to some outside force or savior, no. It's about self-realization and self-awakening to truth. And you achieve that through your own perseverance, self-exertion, and insight. He literally told his followers, I have directed you towards deliverance. The Dhamma, the truth, is to be self-realized.
Wow. So the buck stops with you. You can't just wish for it or ask someone else for it. You have to do it. And the source insists this wasn't like a one-time thing only he could do. Perfect enlightenment is not the prerogative of a single being. Anyone can achieve it if they earnestly strive. Those who make it, the arahats, are called victors like me, they who have won defilement's end.
Exactly. That openness, that emphasis on your own effort, your own investigation, it's fundamental. The source brings up the Kalama Sutta, which is amazing. The Buddha tells people basically, don't believe something just because it's tradition or scripture or logical or even because you respect the teacher. Instead, he says, know for yourselves. These things are wholesome, blameless, and profitable. Then do you, having undertaken them, abide therein. Investigate. See for yourself if it works, if it's good.
That's incredible. Don't just take my word for it. Check it out. The source uses some helpful analogies too, like the Buddha is a signpost showing the way, but he doesn't carry you. Or he's like a doctor who diagnoses the illness and gives you the prescription, but you, the patient, have to actually take the medicine. He shows the truth. You walk the path.
Precisely. He points the way.
Okay, let's get to the absolute core here, according to the source. The Four Noble Truths. The book calls them the central conception of Buddhism. Flat out says you can't get what the Buddha taught without understanding these four.
That's right. The entire teaching, this source argues, really comes down to understanding suffering dukkha and the path to ending that suffering. Even when people misunderstood him, maybe called him a nihilist, the Buddha kept saying, formally, as well as now, I make known only suffering and the cessation of suffering. That's the focus.
All right, let's break down the first noble truth then. Dukkha. The source uses suffering or unsatisfactoriness. It's clearly more than just, stubbing your toe.
No, much broader. Yes. The source lays it out. First, there's the obvious kind, ordinary suffering, dukkha dukkata.
Yeah.
Things like birth, getting old, being sick, dying, being apart from loved ones, being stuck with people you don't like, not getting what you desire. That's the stuff we all recognize as unpleasant.
Okay, yeah, got it.
Yeah. But then there's a deeper layer. The unsatisfactoriness of conditioned states, sakkara dukkata. This refers to anything that's put together, anything compounded. That includes us, our bodies, our minds. The source mentions the 5 aggregates: matter, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. What we call a self is just this bundle of constantly changing forces. And the insight here is that Anything conditioned, anything subject to change, is inherently unstable. You can't rely on it for lasting happiness. It's like building on sand.
Ah, so it's the built-in impermanence and instability of, well, everything, including me.
Exactly. And that leads to the third type, suffering due to change, viparinama dukkha. This means even pleasant things are ultimately dukkha, unsatisfactory, because they don't last, they're transient. The source quotes Shakespeare, actually, when sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. But it also says, joy too is dukkha, for it is transient. That pleasant feeling fades, and that fading, that loss, is itself a form of suffering.
That's a really key point. Even happiness is tinged with this unsatisfactoriness because it's temporary. The source suggests that seeing this clearly, with dispassionate discernment, seeing things in their proper perspective, that's what leads to nissarana, liberation from this constant cycle of chasing pleasure and finding disappointment. Okay, on to the second noble truth, samudaya, the origin, the cause of all this suffering. And since the source makes clear there's no external creator pulling the strings in this view, the cause must be internal.
Yes, in the innermost recesses of man himself, as the source puts it. And that cause is identified as tantra craving. It's described as the craving which causes rebecoming, rebirth, accompanied by passionate pleasure, basically thirst or intense desire. The source breaks it down into three types. There's craving for sense pleasures, kama tantra, wanting nice sights, sounds, tastes, feelings. Then craving for continued existence, bhava tantra, wanting things to last, wanting to become something, wanting life to go on. And finally, craving for non-existence, vibhavat, wanting unpleasant things to just disappear, wanting annihilation, maybe even self-destruction.
So it boils down to wanting reality to be different than it is, wanting pleasure to stay, pain to go, me to continue, or me to end, that kind of wanting.
That's a good way to put it. It's that fundamental dissatisfaction driving us. And the source introduces dependent origination, paicca samuppada, to explain how this process unfolds. It's not random, it's a chain of cause and effect. It starts with ignorance, not seeing things clearly. That leads to volitional actions, kama. Those actions shape our consciousness, which leads to name and form, the senses, all the way down through feeling, to craving, then clinging, then becoming. And that whole chain results in birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair. Thus does this whole mass of suffering arise.
That chain can seem a bit complex, but the core message is that suffering has identifiable causes, rooted in ignorance and craving, and unfolds through a predictable process.
Precisely. And kama volition, intentional action, is highlighted as a key driver. Volition, O monks, I declare, is kama. Our choices, our actions driven by craving, shape our present and future. But, importantly, the source notes it's not all predetermined by past kama. Present actions matter hugely. External causes play a role too. We're not just puppets of the past. We create kama now, and we have the power to change course to break that chain.
Which leads perfectly to the third noble truth, nirodha, the cessation, the end of suffering. This is nibbana. The source mainly describes it by what stops the extinction of lust, hate, and delusion. It's the cessation of becoming.
Yes, and the source mentions two aspects, kind of relating to whether the physical body is still present. There's nibbana with a basis remaining, sapadisesa, this is enlightenment while alive. The defilements are gone, but the arahat still experiences pleasant and unpleasant things through the senses, just without reacting with craving or aversion. Then there's nibbana without a basis remaining. Anupadisesa is the final passing away, panibbana. The aggregates cease. All conditioned experience becomes cool, ceases entirely.
It seems really important that the source emphasizes Nibbana isn't a place like heaven. It's described as beyond both positive and negative, not related to anything conditioned. When an enlightened being passes, it's the cessation of becoming, not arriving somewhere. Nibbana has no location. What happens then cannot be theorized, cannot be defined.
Right. It's presented as the ultimate truth, the end of the suffering cycle, but it's inexpressible and undeclared in conventional terms.
Okay, so suffering exists, it has a cause, craving rooted in ignorance, it can cease, nibbana, and finally, the fourth noble truth, magga, the path to that cessation. This is the practical how-to. The source calls it the only aspect which deals with practice. It's the ABC and the XYZ of the Buddha's way of life.
This is the ancient path we mentioned at the start.
And the source describes it as a gradual training, a training in how we speak, act, and think. It leads to true wisdom and ultimately full enlightenment. And it's explicitly open to all irrespective of race, class, or creed.
Absolutely. And it's called the right path, samani, because, well, there's also a wrong path, micca. The source uses a great parable here. Imagine a guide showing someone how to get past obstacles. A thick forest representing ignorance, a dangerous marsh, standing for sense pleasures, a steep cliff like vexation or despair, to finally reach a safe, pleasant, level ground, nibbana. It shows the path navigates the very causes of suffering. Okay, so it's a practical map, and it's structured right into three main sections. Yes, the source groups the 8 factors into 3. Morality or ethical conduct, sila, concentration or mental discipline, samadhi, and wisdom or insight, panya. Under wisdom, you have right understanding and right thought. Under morality, there's right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And under concentration, you find right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. But the source stresses they're all interdependent and interrelated. You need them all working together. It's not strictly linear.
Let's dig into a few key ones, starting with wisdom, right? Understanding, samadhi. The source calls this one indispensable, foundational. It's about understanding life as it really is, specifically understanding those 4 noble truths we just discussed.
Exactly. It sets the direction for everything else. The source says you develop it in 2 main ways. One is hearing the teaching, the good law, from others, paratogosa, learning from reliable sources. The other, very important, is systematic wise attention, yoniso manasikara. This means looking deeply at your own experience, analyzing things, seeing their conditioned nature, how they arise and pass, not just surface-level awareness.
And without this understanding, the source says people are basically blind. They don't see the reality of dukkha, of unsatisfactoriness. They get caught in what the source calls illusions or vipallasa, like seeing permanence where there's only change, seeing real satisfaction in fleeting pleasures, seeing a solid self where there isn't one, and finding beauty in things that, on closer look, are maybe repulsive or impermanent.
Right. And a huge part of shattering those illusions, according to the source, is realizing anato no self. Again, this isn't saying nothing exists. It's a mere denial of anato, the rejection of a permanent, unchanging soul or ego at the core of our being. The source calls it revolutionary. It quotes, "No doer of the deed is there, no one who experiences its result. Bare phenomena flow on. This alone is the right view." It uses that analogy of a child becoming an adult, neither the same nor totally different. It challenges that deep-seated sense of a fixed me.
That's a massive shift. Realizing self is more like a process than a thing. Okay, still in the wisdom group, next is right thought, samasakappa. This seems to be about actively choosing what goes on in our minds, cultivating the good stuff.
Exactly. It's about working with your intentions. The source highlights 3 types of wholesome thoughts to cultivate. Thoughts of renunciation, meaning letting go, non-attachment rather than grasping. Thoughts of goodwill or loving kindness, metta. And thoughts of non-harm or compassion, karo. These counteract lust, ill will, and cruelty.
The source specifically connects goodwill and non-harm to metta and karu, calling them boundless states that should extend to all beings without bias.
Yes, and compassion, karu, gets special mention as the heart of Buddhism in this text. It's defined not as pity or weakness, but as the quality that makes the heart tremble and quiver at the distress of others. It's an active empathy that spurs him to action. The source gives examples, the Buddha himself nursing a sick monk, or using love and compassion to transform the violent Angulimala.
So this isn't just passive well-wishing. It takes effort, mind training. The source advises noticing unwholesome thoughts when they arise and consciously replacing them, cultivating the wholesome ones.
Precisely, it's active mental cultivation.
Okay, moving to the morality sila group, right action, samakamanta. This covers physical actions, abstain from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct.
Yes, these are the first 3 of the 5 precepts, often taken by lay followers. But the source frames them positively too. Abstaining from killing means living kind and compassionate to all living beings. Abstaining from stealing means respecting others' property, taking only what's given. Abstaining from sexual misconduct implies purity and respect in relationships. The core idea is that ethical action brings fearlessness, security, and peace, both for oneself and for others affected by one's actions.
Makes sense. And that connects to right livelihood, samajiva. Your job shouldn't involve harming others either.
Right. The path extends into your economic life. The source is quite specific about livelihoods to avoid. Dealing in weapons, in living beings like slavery or animals for slaughter. Dealing in meat, intoxicants or poisons. It shows a real concern for social well-being. Earn your living honestly, ethically, without exploiting anyone. The source points out how wrong livelihood causes so much unhappiness, disharmony, and trouble. Even for monks, there's a right livelihood living simply, for the purpose of restraint, for abandoning, for dispassion, for cessation, not for gain or deceit.
All right, now the concentration samadhi group. Right. Effort, Samavayama. This is about mental energy, willpower.
Yes, sustained mental energy. The source describes its four functions, which are really practical. 1. Prevent unwholesome thoughts that haven't arisen yet from arising. 2. Abandon unwholesome thoughts that have already arisen. 3. Develop wholesome thoughts that haven't arisen yet. And 4. Maintain and cultivate wholesome thoughts that are already present.
So it's like being a good gardener for your mind, weeding and cultivating.
That's a great analogy. It requires consciously stirring up energy to check the negative and grow the positive. The source uses that story of the monk's shoe, and the lute string's effort needs balance. Not too tight, not too loose, just right for making music, or in this case, for mental progress.
Okay, then, right, mindfulness, samasati. This is huge these days. The source calls it constant watchfulness and attention.
Yes, and it directly references the Satipatthana Sutta, the foundations of mindfulness discourse. It's about applying bare awareness to what's happening right now in four areas: the body, sensations, breath; feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral; the mind, states like greed, anger, calm; and mental objects, or Dhamma, like the hindrances, the aggregates, the truths themselves.
The goal is to see things directly as they are, without the distortion of those illusions we talked about.
Exactly, to overcome wrong views. The source uses a nice simile. An acrobat protecting himself also protects his partner, and vice versa. By protecting yourself through mindfulness, through forbearance, harmlessness, loving kindness, compassion, you protect others. And by protecting others, you protect yourself. It stresses mindfulness isn't just for meditation retreats. It's crucial in daily life, dealing with challenges and mental hindrances. It's called the chief characteristic of all good and wholesome actions.
And finally, right concentration, samasamadhi, developing focus.
Yes, the ability to unify the mind, to bring it to one point. The source says it's built on virtue and effort. Its main function initially is to suppress the five hindrances, those mental roadblocks: sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, dullness, sleepiness, restlessness and worry, and skeptical doubt. When these are quieted, the mind can enter states of deep calm and absorption, the jhanas. The mind becomes clear, steady like a pair of scales.
But you mentioned earlier concentration alone isn't enough for liberation.
Correct. The source makes this point clearly. Concentration can push down the hindrances, provide peace and clarity, but it doesn't eradicate the underlying latent tendencies, anusaya. Those deep-rooted tendencies towards greed, hatred, and delusion can still pop up when triggered by sense experiences, unless they're seen through with wisdom, with insight.
Ah, okay. So concentration creates the stable platform, the clear mind that's needed for wisdom, for understanding to do its deeper work of uprooting the defilements.
Precisely. Concentration is the necessary support for insight, which leads to final liberation.
Wow. Okay, that was quite the journey through the Buddha's ancient path. We've really unpacked his own story, the core ideas of relying on yourself, investigating truth, the whole framework of the Four Noble Truths, explaining suffering and its end, and then this incredibly detailed Eightfold Path, touching every part of life: thoughts, speech, action, work, mental training. It's comprehensive.
It really is. And the source presents the Eightfold Path as the practical method for untangling ourselves from samsara, that cycle of suffering and repeated becoming. It's not theory. It's presented as a path you walk, you cultivate continuously.
A path towards, as the source says, purity of vision and the end of suffering. And it reminds us there are no shortcuts to real peace and happiness. It takes work.
Which maybe leads to a final thought for you listening right now. Given this ancient path, this blueprint for transformation laid out in the source, how might focusing on cultivating just one of these factors, maybe
Yeah.
understanding, looking at things more deeply, or right effort, actively working with your thoughts, or perhaps right speech, how might that shift how you approach things just today?
Something to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this gives you a solid grasp of these core teachings and maybe sparks some curiosity to explore further.